Now Manchester comes to India. In this topic we are going to discuss how Manchester goods are exported to India and how they got the monopoly right over Indian trade, how the Indian markets were declined, that we are going to discuss in this topic. In 1772, Henry Patulu, he was a company official. He had ventured to say that is boldly said that the demand for Indian textile could never reduce since any other nation produced goods for the same quality. Yet by the beginning of the 19th century, we see the beginning of a long decline of textile exports from India. In 1811 to 1812, piece of goods accounted for 33% of the India's exports. By 1850 to 51, it was no more than 3%. See the differences, how it is declined. Why did this happen? What were its implications? We will discuss now. As cotton industries developed in England, industrial groups began worrying about imports from other countries. They pressurized the government to impose import duties on cotton textiles so that Manchester goods could sell in Britain without facing any competition from outside. At the same time, industrialists persuaded the East India Company to sell British manufactures in Indian markets as well. Exports of British cotton goods increased dramatically in the early 19th century. At the end of the 18th century, there had been virtually no import of cotton piece goods into India. By the 1850, cotton piece goods constituted over 31% of the value of Indian imports, and by the 1870s, this figure was over 50%. Cotton weavers in India thus faced two problems at the same time. Their export market collapsed and the local market shrank. So they could not export and also they cannot sell their goods in local domestic trade. Being glutted with the Manchester imports, it is because of the Manchester goods are flooded in the Indian market. So they could not capture the Indian trade. Produced by the Manchester goods are produced by machines at low cost. The imported cotton goods were so cheap that weavers could not easily compete with them. By the 1850s, reports from most weaving regions of India narrated stories of decline and desolation. By the 1860s, weavers faced a new problem. They could not get a sufficient supply of raw cotton of good quality. This is another problem that Indian weavers faced. When American Civil War broke out in 1776 and cotton supplies from the US were cut off to the British. So there is no other way, the British turned to India. As raw cotton exports from India increased, the price of raw cotton shot up. Weavers in India were starved of supplies and forced to buy raw cotton at exorbitant prices. So the Indian weavers unable to get the raw cotton at cheaper rate and they cannot produce cheaper cloths. So these are the problems that Indian weavers faced. In this situation, weaving could not pay. Then by the end of the 19th century, weavers and other craft people faced yet another problem. Factories in India began production, flooding the market with machine goods. How could weaving industries possibly survive to the Indian weavers? The next topic is factories come up. The first cotton mill, who set up the cotton mill in India, where they set up, in which year they set up, what are the implications by this new factory system that is established in India. The first cotton mill in Bombay came up in 1854. This question will be asked in one more question, keep it in mind. Which year the Bombay mill was set up or where was the first cotton mill set up? You have to answer for this question. Bombay in 1854. And it went into production 2 years later. By 1862, 4 mills were at work with 94 spindles and 2,150 looms. Around the same time, jute mills came up in Bengal, the first being set up in 1855 and another one 7 years later in 1862. In northern India, the Elgin mill was started in Kanpur in the 1860s. Kanpur is in Uttar Pradesh in 1860s, and a year later the first cotton mill of Ahmedabad was set up. 1861 the Ahmedabad mill was set up in Gujarat. By the 1874 the first spinning and weaving mill of Madras began production. This was also will ask questions in which year the first weaving and spinning mill set up in India, in Tamil Nadu, where they will ask, so you have to answer 1854 and you have to write the answer for the where it is means you have to write Madras. Who set up the industries? Where did the capital come from? Who came to work in the mill? Now in this topic, the early entrepreneurs. So in this topic we are going to discuss who are the people that entrepreneurs of India and how they invest money from where they got this money for investing on cotton textile industries, and from where the people came to work for the companies. Industries were set up in different regions by varying sorts of people. Let us see who they were. The history of many business groups goes back to trade with China. The British in India began exporting opium to China and took tea from China to England. Many Indians became junior players in this trade, tea and opium trade, so they got profit in this business. They providing finance, procuring supplies and shipping consignments. Having earned through the trade, some of the businessmen had vision of developing industrial enterprises in India. In Bengal, Dwarkanath Tagore made his future in the Chinese trade before he turned to industrial investment, setting up 6 joint stock companies in 1830s and 1840s. Tagore's enterprises sank along with those of others in the viral business crisis of the 1840s. But later in the 19th century, many of the China traders became successful industrialists. In Bombay, Parsis like Dinshaw Petty and Jamshedji Nasarwanji Tata, who built a huge industrial empires in India, accumulated their initial wealth partly from the export to China and partly from raw cotton shipments to England. So in these two trade they got more profit, and by this they set up cotton textile industries in India. Another entrepreneur, Sethu Hukam Chand, he was a Marwari businessman who set up the first Indian jute mill in Kolkata in 1917, also traded with China. So did the father as well as the grandfather of the famous industrialist G.D. Birla. You maybe heard about Tata Birla. So the Tata Birla's grandfather is Sethu Hukam Chand, and the capital was accumulated through other trade networks. Some merchants from Madras traded with Burma, while others had links with the Middle East and East Africa. There were yet other entrepreneurs such as Jamshedji Jijibai. The picture shows here is Jamshedji Jijibai. He was the son of a Parsi weaver. Like many others of his time, he was involved in the China trade and shipping. He owned a large fleet of ships, but competition from England and American shippers forced him to sell his ships by the 1850s. Dwarkanath Tagore, he was, the picture shows here is Dwarkanath Tagore. He believed that India would develop through westernization and industrialization. He invested in shipping, shipbuilding, mining, banking, plantations and insurance, commercial groups, but they were not directly involved in external trade. They operated within India, carrying goods from one place to another, banking money, transferring funds between cities and financing traders. When opportunities of investment in industries opened up, many of them set up factories. As colonial control over Indian trade tightened, the space within which Indian merchants could function became increasingly limited. They were barred from trading with Europe in manufactured goods and had to export mostly raw materials and food grains, raw cotton, opium, wheat, and indigo required by the British. They are also gradually edged out of the shipping business. Till the First World War, European managing agencies in fact controlled a large sector of Indian industries. There were three of the biggest ones were Bird Higglers and Co. Andrew Yule is another company, and Jardine Skinner. These are the three important companies. These agencies mobilized capital setup, joint stock companies, and managed them. In most instances, Indian financiers provided the capital, while the European agencies made all investment and businesses decisions. The European merchant industrialists had their own chambers of commerce, which Indian businessmen were not allowed to join. Where did the workers come from? In this topic, we are going to discuss from which are the places Indian workers went for working in the newly established factories or industries. Factories needed workers. With the expansion of factories, this demand increased. In 1901, there were 5,84,000 workers in Indian factories. By 1946, the number was over 2,43,000. 2 crores 43 lakhs 6,000. Where did the workers come from? In most of industrial regions, workers came from the districts around in Maharashtra. Peasants and artisans who found no work in the village went to industrial centers in search of work. Over 50% of workers in the Bombay cotton industries in 1911 came from the neighboring district of Ratnagiri, while the mills of Kanpur got most of their textile hands from the villages within the districts of Kanpur. Most often, mill workers moved between the village and the city, returning to their village homes during harvests and festivals. Over time, as news of employment spread, workers travelled great distances in the hope of work in the mills. From the United Provinces, for instance, they went to work in the textile mills of Bombay and in the jute mills of Calcutta. Partners in entrepreneurs. J.N. Tata, R.D. Tata, Sir R.J. Tata and Sir D.J. Tata. These are the group of Tata family who are sitting and discuss various establishment of industries, factories and production, international trade. In 1912, J.N. Tata set up the first iron and steel works in India at Jamshedpur. That is TISCO, you know very well, it may be studied in lower classes in 8th standard. Iron and steel industries in India started much later than textiles. In colonial India, industrial machinery, railways and locomotives were mostly imported, so capital goods industries could not really develop in any significant way till independence. This picture shows the young workers of a Bombay mill, early 20th century. When workers went back to their villages, they liked to dressing up like this. This is a head jobber. Notice how the posture and clothes emphasize the jobber's position of authority. He is standing very strict and proud with his umbrella. Getting jobs was always difficult even when mills multiplied and demand for workers increased. The numbers seeking work were always more than the jobs available. Entry into the mills was also restricted. Industrialists usually employed a jobber to get new recruits. A question will come, who were the jobbers? Jobbers were the old trusted worker for the company or industry or for his master. He got the jobber got people from his village, ensured them jobs. So this was his main duty. He bring the workers from villages, from his own villages, and helped them settle in the cities and provide them jobs, help and money in times of crisis. The jobber therefore became a person with some authority and power. He began demanding money and gifts for his favor and controlling the lives of workers. So this is the way that bribing is developed in Indian society. The jobber is worked like that. Though he was trusted worker to his master, but he is getting gifts from workers. The number of factory workers increased over time. However, as you will see, they were a small proportion of the total industrial workers. A new topic in this lesson is the peculiarities of industrial growth. In this topic, we are going to discuss how the Indian industrialists changed or shifted their production from fabric to yarn. European managing agencies which dominated industrial production in India was interested in certain kinds of products. They established tea and coffee plantations, acquiring land at cheap rates from the colonial government in India, and they invested mining indigo and jute. Most of these were products required primarily for export trade and not for sale in India. When Indian businessmen began setting up industries in the late 19th century, they avoided competing with Manchester goods in the Indian market. Since yarn was not an important part of British imports into India. This is the main reason that why the Indian industrialists shifting from fabric to yarn. The early cotton mills in India produced coarse cotton, the yarn, that is thread, which was finer cotton rather than fabric. When yarn was imported, it was only of the superior variety. The yarn product produced in India, Indian spinning mills, was used by handloom weavers in India or exported to China. By the first decade of the 20th century, a series of changes affected the pattern of industrialization. As the Swadeshi movement gathered momentum, nationalists mobilized people to boycott foreign cloth. So industrial groups organized themselves to protect their collective interests, pressurizing the government to increase tariff protection and grant other concessions. From 1906, moreover, the export of Indian yarn to China declined since produced from Chinese and Japanese mills flooded the Chinese market. So industrialists in India began shifting from yarn to cloth production. Once again, our Indian industrialists produce from yarn to fabrics. Cotton piece of goods production in India doubled between 900 and 1912. Yet till the First World War, industrial growth was slow in India. The war created a dramatically new situation in India, mainly that with the British mills busy with war production to meet the needs of the army. Manchester imports into India declined, so they could not concentrate Indian trade. Suddenly, Indian mills had a vast home market to supply. This was the reason that number one reason Chinese market is flooded with Japanese goods. At the same time, British could not export goods to India because they involved in the First World War, so they could not concentrate Indian trade. Therefore, Indian industrialists got the very good golden opportunity of a local market, that is domestic market. As the war prolonged, Indian factories were called upon to supply war needs. So the Manchester industries could not produce the need of the army people, so they given order to Indian textile industries for war materials, just like that, jute bags, cloth for uniform, that is army uniform, tents and leather boots, horse and mule saddles, that is the cloth is spread on the back of horse, this is mule saddles, and host of the other items. These are the things they gave order to Indian textile industries. Therefore, Indian industries are running many shifts. New factories were set up, and old ones ran multiple shifts. They are running 3 shifts or more than that. Many new workers were employed, and everyone was made to work longer hours. Over the war years, industrial production boomed in India. After the war, Manchester could never recapture its old position in the Indian market. Unable to modernize and compete with the US, Germany and Japan, the economy of Britain crumbled after the war. So they are totally met loss. They could not recapture the Indian market. Cotton production collapsed, and exports of cotton cloth from Britain fell dramatically. Within the colonies, local industries gradually consolidated their position, substituting foreign manufacturers and capturing the home markets. Small scale industries were predominant in the Indian economy. Let us discuss now how the small scale producers are predominant in Indian economy. While factory industries grew steadily after the war, large industries formed only a small segment of the economy. Most of them, about 67% in 1911, were located in Bengal and Bombay. Over the rest of the country, small scale production continued to predominate. Only a small proportion of the total industrial labor force worked in the registered factories. 5% in the 1911 and 10% in 1931. So very less number of people only working in the modern industries. The rest of the population were worked in small workshops and household units, often located in alleys and by lanes invisible to the passerby. They are working in very small, narrow streets, and their household works they are doing. In fact, in some instances, handicrafts production actually expanded in the 20th century. This is true even in the case of the handloom sector that we have discussed. While cheap machine-made thread wiped out the spinning industry in the 19th century, the weavers survived despite problems. In the 20th century, handloom cloth production expanded steadily, almost trebling between 1900 and 1940. Let us understand how did this happen. This was partly because of technological changes. Handicrafts people adopt new technology if that helps them improve production without excessively pushing up costs. So by the second decade of the 20th century, we find weavers using looms with a fly shuttle. What is a fly shuttle? It is a new device used in the power looms. This increased shuttle increased the productivity per worker, speed up production and reduced labor demand. By 1941, over 35% of the handlooms in India were fitted with new fly shuttles in regions like Trivangur, that is present day Kerala, it is called Trivangur Samasthanam. So Trivangur, Madras, that is present Tamil Nadu, Mysore, it is Karnataka, Cochin is again Kerala, Bengal in the proportion was 70 to 80%. There were several other small innovations that helped weavers improve their productivity and compete with the mill sector. A fly shuttle is a mechanical device used for weaving moved by means of ropes and pulleys. It places the horizontal threads that is called weft, W-E-F-T. Weft is a thread that used in the horizontal in the weaving pattern into the vertical threads is called a warp. So in between that warp it runs very forcefully and it increases the production. The invention of the fly shuttle made it possible for weavers to operate large looms and weave wide pieces of cloths. Certain groups of weavers were in a better position than others to survive the competition with the mill industries. Almost weavers some produced coarse cloth while others wove finer varieties. The coarser cloth was bought by the poor and its demand fluctuated violently. In times of bad harvest and famines, when the rural poor had little to eat and their cash income disappeared, they could not possibly buy cloth. The demand for the finer varieties bought by the well-to-do family was more stable. The rich could buy these even when the poor starved. Famines did not affect the sale of Banarasis or Baluchari saris. These are the saris which are very costly in those days, even now. Anyhow, moreover, as you have seen, mills could not imitate specialized weaves. Saris with woven hard borders are the famous lungis and handcrafts of Madras could not be easily displaced by mill production. Our Indian weavers are very talented. They make very fine borders and fine quality, also designs. This cannot be replaced by any mill-made clothes. Weavers and other craft people who continue to expand production through the 20th century did not necessarily prosper. They lived hard lives and worked long hours. Very often, the entire household, including all women and children, had to work at various stages of the production process. But they were not simply remnants of past times in the age of factories. Their life and labor was integral to the process of industrialization. The next topic is market for goods. In this topic we are going to discuss how the British once again they increased their trade in India. They got some concession from the Indian rulers. Also they became a political power. They got political power in some parts of India. Besides this, they also got the Indian market through advertisements. We have seen how British manufacturers attempted to take over Indian market and how Indian weavers and craftsmen, traders and industrialists resisted colonial controls, demand tariff protection, created their own spaces and tried to expand the market for their produce. But when new products are produced, people have to be persuaded to buy them. They have to feel like using the product. How was this done? One way in which the new consumers are created is through advertisements. As you know, advertisements make products appear desirable and necessary. You may be studied in some standard history book how the advertisement is playing master role in the trade. They try to shape the minds of people and create new needs. Today we live in a world where advertisements surround us. They appear in newspapers, magazines, hoardings, street walls, television screens. But if we look back into history, we find that from the very beginning of the industrial age, advertisements have played a part in expanding the markets for products and in shaping a new consumer culture. When Manchester industrialists began selling cloth in India, they used Indian labels on the cloth bundles. The labels was needed to make the place of manufacture and the name of the company familiar to the buyer. The label was also to be a mark of quality. When buyers saw "Made in Manchester" written in bold letters on the label, they were expected to feel confident about buying the cloth because it is a very good quality. So the "Made in Manchester" is give the confidence to the buyers. This is a Gryphwater calendar of 1928 by M.B. Dhurandhar. The image of baby Krishna was most commonly used to popularize baby products. This is when the mother is using the Gryphwater, it is blessed by Lord Krishna, so she is mostly likely to buy these kind of Gryphwaters. The next one is the Manchester labels, early 20th century. Images of numerous Indian gods and goddesses like Kartika, Lakshmi and Saraswati are shown in imported cloth labels approving the quality of the product being marketed. Maharaja Ranjit Singh on a Manchester label is pasted. So this shows that with the support of King, the Manchester goods are entering into India. So the people buying this product, there is no question of quality. Historic figures are used to create respect for the product. But labels did not only carry words and texts. They also carried images were very often beautifully illustrated. If you look at the old labels, sunlight, it is Lord Krishna seated on an eagle and with his wives. So these manufacturers, their calculations and their way they appealed to the people. If they use this soap, detergent soap, the clothes will be shining. So therefore they use this kind of labels in their products. Images of Indian gods and goddesses regularly appeared on the labels. It was as if the association with the gods gave divine approval to the goods being sold. So they create such a mindset. Therefore they use Indian gods and goddesses in their labels. The printed image of Krishna or Saraswati was also intended to make the manufacturer from a foreign land appear somewhat familiar to Indian people. By the late 19th century, manufacturers were printing calendars to popularize their products. Not only they use in the product labels, they also used in the calendars, because these calendars are used even small cottages also. Unlike newspapers and magazines, calendars were used even by people who could not read, or who could not able to understand what is it. Therefore, they used in the calendars the images of gods and with the advertisements. They were hung in tea shops and in poor people's homes just as much as in office and middle class apartments. And those who hung the calendars had to see the advertisements day after day through the year. In these calendars, once again we see the figures of gods being used to sell new products, like the images of gods, figures of important personages of emperors and nawabs adorned advertisement and calendars. The images very often seem to say, if you respect the royal figure, then respect this product. When the product was being used by kings or produced under royal command, its quality could not be questioned. When Indian manufacturers advertised, the nationalist message was clear and loud. If you care for the nation, then buy products that Indian produce. That is in the idea of be Indian, buy Indian. Advertisements became a vehicle of the nationalist message of Swadeshi. The picture shows that Bharat Mata is giving clothes to poor Indians. So with this the lesson over. Now conclusion. Clearly the age of industries has meant major technological changes, growth of factories and the making of a new industrial labor force. However, as you have seen, hand technology and small scale production remained an important part of the industrial landscape in India. With this, the lesson over. Have a nice day. Thank you for watching the video.